Hello, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the pre-record. We're going to start doing read-alouds this way, and then we're going to talk about them during class. Hopefully, your first day of online has been going well. Chapter 1 of The Thief of Always is called Harvey Half Devoured. The great gray beast February had eaten Harvey Swick alive. Here he was, buried in this belly of that smothering month, wondering if he would ever find his way through the cold coils that lay between here and Easter. So already we're getting some pretty good imagery, some very strong descriptive words. Kind of picture how dreary the month of February is. I'm going to try turning off my lights. I thought I might need more, but I don't think I do. There we go. There we go. I don't look sick anymore. I thought I looked too lit up. There we go. He didn't think much of his chances. More than likely, he'd become so bored as the hours crawled by that one day he'd simply forget to breathe. Then maybe people would get to wondering why such a fine young lad had perished in his prime. It would become a celebrated mystery, which wouldn't be solved until some great detective decided to recreate a day in Harvey's life. Then, and only then, would the grim truth be discovered. The detective would first follow Harvey's route to school every morning, trekking through the dismal streets. Then he'd sit at Harvey's desk and listen to that pitiful drone of the history teacher and the science teacher, and wonder how the heroic boy had managed to keep his eyes open. And finally, as the wasted day dwindled to dusk, he'd trace the homework truck. And as he set foot on the step from which he had departed that morning, and people asked him, as they would, why such a sweet soul as Harvey had died, he would shake his head and say, "It's very simple." "Oh?" the curious crowd would say, "Do tell." And brushing away a tear, the detective would reply, "Harvey Swick was eaten by the great gray beast February." So, Harvey, we're already figuring out, is kind of dramatic with how bored he is. So he's saying one day he feels like he's just going to die of boredom, and the detective is going to be retracing his tracks from the day that he died and kind of come to the same conclusion that Harvey had of, yep, he was just bored to death, literally bored to death. All right. It was a monstrous month, that was for sure, a dire and dreary month. The pleasures of Christmas, both sharp and sweet, were already dimming in Harvey's memory, and the promise of summer was so remote as to be mythical. There'd be a spring break, of course, but how far off was that? 5 weeks? 6? Math wasn't his strong point, so he didn't irritate himself further by attempting, and failing, to calculate the days. He simply knew long before the sun came to save him that he would have withered away in the belly of the beast. "You shouldn't waste your time sitting up here," his mom said when she came in and found him watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass of his bedroom window. So think about how bored you would have to be to sit at your window and watch raindrops race each other. Not very exciting. "I've got nothing better to do," Harvey said without looking around. "Well then, you can make yourself useful," his mom said. Harvey shuddered. Useful? That was another word for hard labor. He sprang up, marshaling his excuses. He hadn't done this. He hadn't done that. But it was too late. "You can start by tidying up this room," his mom said. "But don't sit wishing days away, honey. Life's too short. But that's a good boy." And with that, she left him to it. Muttering to himself, he stared around the room. It wasn't even untidy. There were 1 or 2 games scattered around, a couple of drawers open, a few clothes hanging out. It looked just fine. "I am 10, he said to himself. Having no brothers and sisters, he talked to himself a lot. "I mean, it's not like I'm a kid. I don't have to tidy up just because she says so. It's boring." He wasn't just muttering now. He was talking out loud. I want to. He went to the mirror and quizzed it. What do I want? The straw-haired, snub-nosed, brown-eyed boy he saw before him shook his head. "I don't know what I want," he said. I just know I'll die if I don't have some fun. I will. I'll die. As he spoke, the window rattled. A gust of wind blew hard against it, then a second, then a third. And even though Harvey didn't remember the window being so much as an inch ajar, it was suddenly thrown open. Cold rain spattered his face. Half closing his eyes, he crossed to the window and fumbled to slam it, making sure that the latch was in place this time. The wind had started his lamp moving, and when he turned back, the whole room seemed to be swinging around. One moment, the light was blazing in his eyes. The next, it was flooding the opposite wall. But in between the blaze and the flood, lit the middle of his room. And standing there, shaking the rain off of his hat, was a stranger. He looked harmless enough. He was no more than 6 inches taller than Harvey, his frame scrawny, his skin distinctly yellow in color. He was wearing a fancy suit, a pair of glasses, and a lavish smile. "Who are you?" Harvey demanded, wondering how he could get past this interloper to the door. So he's like, how do I sneak past this guy and get out of my room if I need to? "Don't be nervous," the man replied, teasing off one of his suede gloves, taking Harvey's hand and shaking it. "My name's Rictus. You are Harvey Swick, aren't you?" "Yes." "I thought for a moment I'd gotten the wrong house." Harvey couldn't take his eyes off Rictus's grin. So his character, just in case it's hard to hear me pronounce it on the webcam, it's Rictus, Rictus, Rictus. Harvey couldn't take his eyes off Rictus's grin. It was wide enough to shame a shark, with 2 perfect rows of gleaming teeth. Rictus took off his spectacles, pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, then started to mop off the raindrops. Either he or the handkerchief gave off an odor that was far from fragrant. The smell, in truth, was flatulent. Flatulence is a fancy word for farts, if you were wondering. "You've got questions, I can see that," Rictus said to Harvey. "Yeah." "Ask away, I've got nothing to hide." "Well, how did you get in here, for one thing?" "Through the window, of course." "It's a long way up from the street." "Not if you're flying." "Flying?" "Of course. How else was I going to get around on such a foul night as this? It was either that or a rowboat. We short folk got to watch out when it's raining hard. One wrong step and you're swimming." He peered at Harvey quizzically. "Do you swim?" "In the summer, sometimes," Harvey replied, wanting to get back to the business of flying. But Rictus took the conversation in another direction entirely. "On nights like this," he said, "doesn't it seem like there'll never be another summer?" "It sure does," said Harvey. "You know, I heard you sighing a mile off." Sorry, I lost my spot. "And I said to myself, there's a kid who needs a vacation." He looked at his watch. "If you've got the time, that is." "The time?" "For a trip, boy, for a trip. You need an adventure, young Swick. Somewhere out of this world." "How'd you hear me sighing when you were a mile away?" Harvey wanted to know. "Why should you care? I heard you, that's all that matters." "Is it magic of some kind?" "Maybe." "Why won't you tell me?" Rictus gave Harvey a beady stare. "I think you're too inquisitive for your own good, that's why," he said, his smile decaying a little. "If you don't want help, that's fine by me." He made a move towards the window. The wind was still gusting against the glass as though eager to come back and carry its passenger away. "Wait," Harvey said. "For what?" "I'm sorry. I won't ask any more questions." Rictus stopped, his hand on the latch. "No more questions, eh?" "I promise," said Harvey. "I told you I'm sorry." So you did, so you did." Rictus peered out at the rain. "I know a place where the days are always sunny, and the nights are full of wonders." "Could you take me there?" "We said no questions, boy. We agreed." "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry." Being the forgiving sort, I'll forget that you spoke, and I'll tell you this. If you'll want me to inquire on your behalf, I'll see if they've got room for another guest. I'd like that. I'm not guaranteeing anything, Rictus said, opening the latch. I understand. The wind gusted suddenly and blew the window wide. The light began to swing wildly. Watch for me, Rictus yelled above the din of the wind and rain. If you're wondering, din is a word that comes up a lot in this book. It's like a loud sound. So just picture like being in your room with a light that's kind of hanging on a cord or a string. It's swinging back and forth like crazy, and it's just really loud wind and rain. It's all you can really hear. Okay, over the din. Where did we? Lost my spot. Explaining the words. Wind gusted suddenly. Watch for me. There we go. Harvey started to ask him if he'd be coming back soon, but stopped himself in the nick of time. No questions, boy, Rictus said, and as he spoke, the wind seemed to fill his coat. It rose up around him like a black balloon, and he was suddenly swept out over the windowsill. Questions rot the mind, he hollered as he went. Keep your mouth shut, and we'll see what comes your way. And with that, the wind carried him off, the balloon of his coat rising like a black moon against the rainy sky. All right, so that was the first chapter of Thief of Always. Just to make sure, I think sometimes when we start a new book, it's a little hard to kind of get the author's voice and kind of understand the words they use. So just to make sure you totally understand what's going on, Harvey Swick is our new character, Harvey, and he is super, super bored. Somehow with magic, this guy named Rictus appeared in his bedroom and offered to take him to a magical place. Let's go back and check. What did he say? He is going to take them for an adventure somewhere out of this world. Where, I can't remember. Oh, here we go. He says, I know a place where the days are always sunny and the nights are full of wonders. Sounds like a magical place. Let's read chapter 2, The Hidden Way. Harvey said nothing about his peculiar visitor to either his mom or his dad, in case they put locks on the windows to stop Rictus from returning to the house. But the trouble with keeping the visit a secret was that after a few days, Harvey began to wonder if he'd imagined the whole thing. Perhaps he'd fallen asleep at the window, he thought, and Rictus had simply been a dream. He kept hoping, nevertheless. Watch for me, Rictus had said, and Harvey did just that. He watched from the window of his room. He watched from his desk at school. He even watched with one eye while he was laying on his pillow at night. But Rictus didn't show. And then, about a week after the first visit, just as Harvey's hopes was waning, kind of dying away, his watchfulness was rewarded. On his way to school, one foggy morning, he heard a voice above his head and looked up to see Rictus floating down from the clouds. His coat swelled up around him so that he looked fatter than a prize pig. How you doing? He said as he descended. I was starting to think I invented you, Harvey replied. You know, like a dream. I get that a lot, Rictus said, his smile wider than ever, particularly from the ladies. Your dream come true, they say. And he winked. And who am I to argue? Do you like my shoes? Harvey looked down at Rictus's bright blue shoes. They were quite a sight, and he said so. I got given them by my boss. He's very happy you're going to visit. So, are you ready? Well, it's no use wasting time. There may not be room for you tomorrow. Can I ask just one question? I thought we agreed. I know, but just one. All right, one. Is this place far from here? Nah, it's just across town. So I'd only be missing a couple hours of school? That's 2 questions, Rictus said. No, I'm just thinking out loud. Rictus grunted. Look, he said, I'm not here to do a great song and dance persuading you. I got a friend called Jive that does that. I'm just a smiler. I smile and I say, come with me to the holiday house. If folks don't want to come, he shrugged. Hey, that's their luck. With that, he turned his back on Harvey. Wait, Harvey protested. I want to come, but just for a while. You can stay as long as you like, Rictus said, or as little. All I want to do is take that glum expression off your face and put one of these up there. His grin grew even larger. Is there any crime in that? No, Harvey said. That's no crime. I'm glad you found me. I really am. So what if he missed all of the morning at school, he thought. It'd be no great loss. Maybe an hour or two of the afternoon as well, as long as he was back at home by 3 or 4. Certainly before dark. I'm ready to go, he said to Rictus. Lead the way. Millsap, the town in which Harvey had lived all his life, wasn't very big, and he thought he'd seen just about all of it over the years, but the streets he knew were soon behind them. And though Rictus was setting a fair speed, Harvey made sure he kept a mental list of landmarks along the way, in case he had to find his own way home. A butcher's shop with 2 pigs' heads hanging from hooks. A church with a yard full of old tombstones beside it. The statue of some dead general, covered from hat to stirrups in pigeon poop. All these sights and more he noted and filed away. So, let's pause there really quick. Harvey is going with Rictus. We know he's going to the holiday house, whatever that is. And as he's walking there, he was saying to himself, I kind of know my town, but maybe they're in this newer part of town or somewhere that Harvey has spent a lot of time. Because he's kind of like, it says something about like the streets he knew were behind them. So that's kind of telling me like he's not very familiar with this part of town. So he's kind of trying to keep track of everything he passes on his way. And while they walked, Rictus kept up a stream of idle chatter. I hate the fog. I just hate it. And there'll be rain by noon. We'll be out of it, of course. He went on from the talk of rain to the state of the streets. Look at this trash all over the sidewalk. It's shameful. And the mud, it's making a fine old mess of my shoes. He had plenty more to say, but none of it was very enlightening. So after a while, Harvey gave up listening. How far was this holiday house? He began to wonder. The fog was chilling him, and his legs were aching. If they didn't get there soon, he was going to turn back. I know what you're thinking, said Rictus. I bet you don't. You're thinking this is all a trick. You're thinking Rictus is leading you on a mystery tour, and there's nothing at the end of it. Isn't that true? Maybe a little. Well, my boy, I've got news for you. Look up ahead. He pointed, and there, not very far from where they stood, was a high wall, which was so long that it disappeared into the fog to the right and left. What do you see? Rictus asked him. A wall, Harvey replied, though the more he stared at it, the less certain of it he was. The stones, which had seemed solid enough at first sight, now looked to be shifting and wavering, as though they'd been chiseled from the fog itself and piled up here to keep out prying eyes. It looks like a wall, Harvey said, but it's not a wall. You're very observant, Rictus replied admirably. Most people just see a dead end, so they turn around and take another street. But not us. No, not us. We're going to keep on walking. You know why? Because the holiday house is on the other side? What a miraculous kid you are, Rictus replied. That's exactly right. Are you hungry, by the way? Starving. Well, there's a woman waiting for you in the house called Mrs. Griffin. And let me tell you, she is the greatest cook in all of America land. I swear on my tailor's grave, anything you can dream of eating, she can cook. All you have to do is ask. Her deviled eggs? Perfection. I don't see a gate, Harvey said. That's because there isn't one. So, how do we get in? Just keep walking. Half out of hunger, half out of curiosity, Harvey did as Rictus instructed, and as he came within 3 steps of the wall, a gust of balmy, flower scented wind, balmy is like nice and warm, flower scented wind slipped between the shimmering stones and kissed his cheek. Its warmth was welcome after his long, cold trek, and he picked up his pace, reaching out to touch the wall as he approached it. The misty stones seemed to reach for him in their turn, wrapping their soft gray arms around his shoulders and ushering him through the wall. He looked back, but the streets he'd stepped out of, with its gray sidewalks and gray clouds, had already disappeared. Beneath his feet, the grass was high and full of flowers. Above his head, the sky was summer blue, and ahead of him, set at the summit of a great hill, was a house that had surely been imagined first in a dream. He didn't wait to see if Rictus was coming after him, nor to wonder how the gray beast February had been slain and this warm day took its place. He simply let out a laugh that Rictus would have been proud of and hurried up the slope and into the shadow of the dream house. And that's where we are going to stop. Just in case you didn't get to see, this is the cover of the book. I'm guessing that's Harvey. Notice it looks like he's standing in front of kind of an old-fashioned window with different seasons in each one. Kind of looks like summer, fall, winter, spring. There's people in some of them. Like you can see a guy down here. You can see, I think, a lady here. And, oh, there's a cat. I'm covering it up with my hand. And then on the back, this is kind of an interesting picture that looks like it's supposed to be the house, but as you can see, there's kind of a, getting a shadow, there's kind of a face. So I am wondering how this is going to work out for Harvey. All right, guys. Well, that is the end of our first part of our read aloud. I will see you tomorrow.